Good evening for those of you watching in Germany or anywhere in mainland Europe, pretty much. And good afternoon or good lunchtime as it is in New York, where John is. John, thanks for joining me today, by the way.
Pleasure. Good to chat.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about something that, well, John and I were sort of saying off air that it's been kind of building over about 2 years, I suppose. I mean, I was looking more about 8, 9 months since we had the whole Australia debacle, but it has been kind of without us maybe always realizing it or consciously thinking about it. But perhaps, as you said, John, it's kind of been building for the last 2 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, I think people are sort of tired of this and talked out. In other ways, it's fascinating. I think you could look at this fairly narrowly as an athlete and the role of certitude and the role of social media and the role of this, unshakable self-belief. But I think also this sort of taps into these larger culture wars we're having and discussions about information and social media and objective truth and government. So I mean, I think the other thing too is that this is still, forgive the pun, this is still a fluid situation, and this is 2 out of 4 majors that Djokovic is missing in 2022 when he is in the throes of this historic race. We don't know what his status is going to be for Australia, so I suspect this will flare up one way or the other, after the U.S. Open for the next 4 months. So I think one reason this is still such a live issue is because it's a live issue.
Yeah. Listen, we're going to get a little bit to the slam race and, of course, what it's meant, and we'll talk about Djokovic as a sports person. But I was interested in something you tweeted about yesterday, I think it was, about this Moderna thing. We've seen some people, obviously, on the Djokovic side or on the skeptical side regarding vaccines, shall we say, and all of this stuff. I saw you tweet yesterday about this Moderna sponsorship in New York. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. Open has dozens and dozens and dozens of sponsors in all different categories, right? I mean, cars and beverages and financial services, and they have, which I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe it's new this year, but there is a Moderna sponsorship, and there is, Moderna signage on the side of the court. I mean, to me, it's a bit of a red herring. A sporting event would be crazy to turn down multi-million-dollar sponsorships from a
Sure.
multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical firm. I mean, if you are a conspiracy theorist, you will run with that and say this company that has, many sub businesses and many products, but also is obviously one of the manufacturer of the vaccine is a U.S. Open sponsorship. You might question the optics of that. I mean, I think it's a bit silly and a bit of a red herring. I think if anything, the USTA would be violating its due diligence if you had
That's
a
right.
company ready to step up with multi-million dollars in sponsorship and you turned it down because they happen to manufacture this vaccine that I think the overwhelming majority of people think is ultimately a good thing. But I mean, it's obviously, if you're staunchly pro Djokovic and you believe this whole thing is a conspiracy and he's being kept out for political reasons, and we can go on and on.
Sure.
Yeah, you'll seize on Moderna, but I think for as many conflicts and many questionable optics plagued tennis and appearances of I don't think this is anything. I don't think this is a big deal.
No, right. And by the way, talking tennis, we are certainly available for multi-billion-dollar sponsorships from Moderna or whoever, really. So
Exactly.
get your offers in. But I mean, actually, to be honest with you, everyone thinks, a lot of people may well think that all these pharmaceutical people are in it together. Well, yesterday, Moderna announced a lawsuit against BioNTech and Pfizer. So anybody who
Right.
thinks that they're all clubbing in together is obviously probably barking up the wrong tree. John, let's talk about tennis if we can, and let's talk about Djokovic on this particular issue, which of course impacts on the tennis. Do you know Djokovic at all? You must have interviewed
Sure.
him, I
Yeah.
guess, at
Yeah.
least in a press conference. Let's talk about him as a person and also as a player.
Oh man, where to begin? I mean, I don't want to exaggerate. We're not friends. I mean, we have a very cordial relationship. I've interviewed him many times. I mean, one thing I tell this story that he's doing this documentary, and the producers called me a few months ago and asked if I would be part of it, and he has editorial control over this. And I said, look, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you, but just so you know, I mean, let's get it out in the open. I've been fairly critical of his stance on vaccinations, his the way he's
Sure.
conducted his business in the pandemic. And they sort of said, "Oh yeah, we know. We're looking for multiple points of view, which I thought spoke really well of Djokovic. I have no issue with him. I think he's very bright. I think he can be very charming. I think on this issue in particular, he has not comported himself wisely, responsibly. I mean, use your adjective. But outside of that, I mean, I hate that this has been co-opted by the extremes, right? So this is either the U.S. government, corrupt Joe Biden, Federer fans, Nadal fans. I mean, this is either conspiracy nonsense, or this is on the other extreme, turned into this absolute disparaging repudiation of everything Djokovic stands for, and he's taken himself out of GOAT consideration because he's such a jackass. I mean, none of this is true. I find him to be thoroughly decent. I never had an unpleasant interaction with him. His tennis speaks for itself. He speaks a million languages. I mean, there's so much to recommend here. I just think on this issue, he's been really irresponsible. That should not take him out of GOAT consideration, but I also think it does no one a service to come with theories that this is all about the U.S. government trying to keep out, a Serbian player because of Western bias or the pharmaceutical cabal. I mean, the fringes have really kind of run with this, and it really is not a discussion that belongs on the fringes.
No, and the thing is, I think some people also, there are some that are aware and bright enough and flexible enough to be able to say, I'm a Djokovic fan, but I'm not particularly keen on his stance regarding vaccination.
Exactly.
I think some people do find that difficult to come to that conclusion. And by the way, even within, I see it on social media, even within the Djokovic fan base, they sometimes attack each other. I mean, I've seen it before where a guy I know is a huge Djokovic fan, but he isn't keen on his vaccine. And then other people say he's not a real Djokovic fan as a result. I mean, it's just nuts.
Yeah, I mean, part of what makes this interesting to me is that you really see these larger trends. I mean, honestly, this is spin this out. I mean, this is how we end up with autocrats. This is how we end up with objectionable politicians. This is how we end up with, this country, we have, RINO, Republican in name only, which is exactly what you're describing, which is people saying, look, I'm a Republican. I just don't agree with every plank. I don't agree with everything Trump has done. And their bona fides as Republicans has been called into question. It's very similar with this. And I think one reason this has kind of interested me is you can see these much larger trends in this tennis specific context.
Yeah. So did you participate in that documentary, or will you be on the documentary when it comes out?
That's a good question. I had spoken with them at the French Open. I don't think we ever coordinated sitting down, but I'm eager to see this documentary, but just tangent. I don't know how much Djokovic, I mean, again, he has editorial control over this. And I think that's something the same way Michael Jordan did over The Last Dance. I mean, I think we should differentiate sort of straight journalism from these projects where the subjects actually can control the storytelling. If this were done independently, or if Djokovic said, listen, I'm out, just full, let's just make the best film and not worry about image and perception. What a year, what a documentary this would be. 5 days in detention and, the going for the, think about what his last year has been like, right? I mean, he wins Wimbledon. There's been an unsuccessful Olympics. He comes to New York. He loses one match away from the Grand Slam. He's beloved. He's in Australia in detention. He doesn't play the spring. He plays Nadal at the French Open. He wins Wimbledon. Now it would be a great film. I just don't know if he will, if he'll consent to sort of a warts and all look at the last 15 months or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, what do we think about, let's just have a quick diversion to the slam race itself. Do we make Nadal the favorite right now? Do we look at Djokovic's longevity and think that probably he will play longer? Does that make Djokovic still the favorite? What's your thoughts on this? I mean, it's always changing, I know.
You don't mean at the US Open, you mean long term.
No, I mean the slam race. So obviously we've got 22, 21, could be 23, 21 in a couple of weeks.
I mean, it's just backing up. I mean, for 10 years now, we've all been obsessed with this, right? And now, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Roger Federer will finish third. Yeah. I feel like that kind of came and went. I mean, that's kind of a big storyline. If we, for 10 years, we've been kind of handicapping this, and one person has been overtaken and probably won't put any more points on the board. I think Djokovic is still probably the favorite, not only because he is younger than Nadal, but I think also in sort of non-chronological years, he's a lot younger too. I mean, he's he's 35 years old. I mean, that's eligible for senior tennis. And yet for everything we talk about and how polarizing he is and vaccines and weeks at number one, we don't talk about his age that much, which I think is a real tribute to him. That 35 is a big number, and he does not show. I mean, it's another reason why the way he's taken himself out of competition is all the more stark. But I mean, I think if I were betting on this, I think he ends up winning the most majors just because time is on his side.
Yeah. It's funny because, John, you'll have been watching tennis for even longer than I have. I sort of started in the mid to late 80s, if you like. And the notion at that time to go beyond 30, I mean, I'm not sure. I think Steffi Graf on the women's side would have been about 30 when she retired. And yet we've got almost 41-year-old Serena Williams. And Venus is, by the way, of course, still competing. And then on the men's side, we've got people in this slam race in their late 30s or mid to late 30s. This would have just been unheard of, even 15 years ago.
I don't believe either McEnroe or Borg won a major north of age 25.
There you go.
Pete Sampras, 30 years old. Steffi was, I think, 31. I think I have my own theories about this, and I think money is a big factor. But no, I mean, this long, I think it's great for the sport, first of all. Yeah. I mean, I think, it's why not play the sport that you can play for a quarter century? Not a lot of football players, Tom Brady notwithstanding, play for 25 years. So I mean, I think it's great for tennis, but I think that it changes the math when, remember, even Chris Evert, and I think Chris Evert won the French Open in like 87, and it was seen she's already north of age 30. I mean, she's 33 years old and turning back the clock, and I mean, Serena won almost half of her majors when she got to that age.
I think sports science must play its role too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you think as well, I mean, I know Gil Gross subscribes to this idea. Do you think as well that they've pushed each other on? I mean, Borg often talked about a sort of slight lack of motivation. Federer said that he found it difficult to embrace a rival, and then he did. And do you think that these three players in particular have actually, they're still playing now, if you like, albeit with an asterisk as far as Federer's concerned. But do you think they're still playing now because of each other? If there was just one of them that they may have retired a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, people say that all the time. They say, Federer and Nadal are still playing, and I'm like, yeah, coincidence? No, I mean, Djokovic, to his credit, has been very outspoken. I want to retire with the most majors. I think if Federer and Nadal, I mean, if Djokovic and Nadal don't exist, Roger Federer's not playing. If Djokovic doesn't exist, I don't think Rafa's playing. The counter to that would be Serena, where there's not. She's obviously playing for history, but she's not pushed by a contemporary rival the way these guys are. But yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. This is what rivalry does. I mean, rivalry elevates, and it's easy to say, well, if Roger hadn't existed, Nadal would have 30 majors, and if Rafa hadn't existed, Djokovic might have 10 French Opens. But the flip side of that is, who knows if in the absence of a rival, I mean, Martina and Chris are both great about that. They both say, like, I benefited from her presence, even if it cost me a couple of majors. If she hadn't been on the scene, I wouldn't have been as good a tennis player. So right. I never say to myself, boy, imagine how I would have done without Chrissy, because if Chrissy isn't there, who knows what my motivation would have been.
I mean, McEnroe says very similar things about Borg, that he was devastated when Borg announced his retirement. Whereas, of course, by the way, coming back to the fandom, which is a big thing now more than ever. I mean, actually, that's a thing. We never used to get this with, you're from the US, so you probably know even more than me, John, but Sampras and Agassi fans didn't loathe each other like Rafa and Djokovic in particular do.
I have two words: social media.
I knew that was coming when you said 2 words.
Yeah, I mean, when would they have interacted? And now it's, I mean, the great irony to all of this. I don't know if you saw Nadal's remarks about Djokovic's absence. They were very down the middle, and sort of, I thought Rafa, he knew the question was coming, but I thought he handled it very politically and very deftly. I mean, the irony of all of this is that these fan bases are much more animated than the actual players. And sort of these fan bases sort of in a weird way, I feel like they kind of do a disservice to the player, because, if Nadal and Federer are quite friendly, it seems a little strange for Federer's fans to absolutely loathe Nadal. You want to say if the actual guy you're rooting for is okay with him, you should probably be okay with him too. but fortunately, the fan bases are not reflective of the players because, man, it's ugly out there.
Yeah. So were you at media day yesterday? Did you go to any of the press conferences, or have you not been there yet?
I was supposed to go. Yes, I had to film something yesterday, but I've
Okay.
seen players around the city, and I haven't
Yeah.
been out to the site yet. No.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, regarding Rafa's comments yesterday, I mean, he does seem to be pretty well trained, if you like. He does sort of skate around things, and his comments yesterday were fairly, as you say, middle down the line. By the way, those middle down the line comments, of course, will be skewed one way or the other, depending on
Exactly.
which side of the fence you're on social media. But actually, coming back to sort of McEnroe, we mentioned him with the Borg thing, and McEnroe has been somebody as well who's been on record a feyu times this summer, in particular, about let Novak play, and we've seen this hashtag on social media as well, gathering pace. Did you have any thoughts on that regarding, the thoughts of just let him play?
It's honestly, I think it's really irresponsible of Jon, and I think I mean, one of Jon's great virtues is that he just says whatever crosses his mind, and he could say something
Sure.
very different and completely contradictory if you asked him tomorrow. But I think, for a guy who is probably more closely associated with the U.S. Open than anyone else, he's got to know how dumb that comment is. I mean, first of all, let him play. Who's letting him play? I mean, this is government policy. USTA is not keeping him out. This is a policy. Yeah, I mean, I think to a lot of us, this policy probably doesn't make a lot of sense on its face. I think we wish this policy is probably going to, in the matter of weeks, it's probably going to be overturned. But who is preventing Djokovic from playing? I mean, if coming from New York, I mean, I don't know. I know Patrick had. I mean, I don't know what Jon's case with COVID, but the idea that somebody would choose not to get vaccinated, something that every single one of his colleagues, every other player in the draw has done, as far as we know.
I mean, I think even his team. I mean, I think Goran, for example, is vaccinated.
Well, I don't know how they would have gotten in the. I mean, that's another. I mean, sidebar. I don't think they would have been allowed in the stadium last year had they not been.
As people in that was the rule. I mean, you may well have been in the stadium. I wasn't in New York last year.
Yeah, I mean, I had to show proof just to walk in the tunnels. But I think Jon should. I think Jon should be held accountable to that. I thought that did no one a service. I mean, the USTA essentially said, look, we don't want the mess that Australia went through. We're just going to follow the government policy. If they say, whatever they say tomorrow, we're going to go with, which I think is completely reasonable and responsible. I don't know why Jon would have taken up. I mean, you score some cheap points, and Djokovic fans can say, Jon McEnroe's an ally, long live. But
sure.
It's just silly, and I think it also was really disloyal to the USTA.
Yeah, I think perhaps, I mean, he's, as you say, he often's outspoken and just says what he thinks, but I still think actually on this comment alone, anyway, maybe it was a bit of a sort of a political thing to just sort of, him and Rafa seem to get on quite well. We see them laughing and joking. We saw that earlier this week, of course, at the Ukraine thing. He seems to get on very well with Novak too. He's probably someone who may even call a friend. We've seen them on court together as well a few times.
Right.
And so that sort of seemed to be like, just let the guy play. I love tennis and you love tennis, Jon, and I love tennis, and we want to see the best players in the world there. And I guess that's the biggest sort of shame about all of this, really.
Yeah, except I think the issue comes back to sort of who has agency here. And if Novak Djokovic were kept out because he's Serbian, because his name starts with an N, I mean, for any of 100 reasons, we would say this is discrimination, this is unfair. Here, Novak Djokovic could have done something very simple that billions of people have done, that hundreds of tennis players have done. He chose not to do it. That's fine. But I mean, I have to submit myself to a pat down when I go through airport security. I don't like it. I'd wish it weren't the case. No one's making me do it, but if I don't do it, I don't get on the plane. I have to show a passport. I'd rather not show a passport, but those are the rules. And I think
I'd rather not go through security. And
exactly. I'd rather not go
through
security. So I don't know what Jon is talking about. I mean, we all wish this were a full field. This benefits nobody. We all want, for every tournament, we want the most best players in the draw. But Novak Djokovic could have done something very simple that would have obviated all of this. It would have been socially responsible. It would have been something that every other player, sometimes willingly, sometimes grudgingly, did. He chose not to do it. That's fine. He has the right to that choice. He has the right to be wrong, I would say. But for Jon McEnroe to say, let him in, I don't even know who that's directed to. The USTA is supposed to make an exception that is in direct contradiction with government policy for one tennis player? Is that what John McEnroe wants to happen?
It would be, if that was the case, it would be Australia all again, where you've got three different sort of powers pulling at what's going on. Listen, what, if anything, would it take to change Djokovic's mind on this stance?
I don't know how much at this point is about just sort of doubling down. I mean, I had an MIT professor who wrote to me on Twitter. I think it's very true. I mean, in the beginning, when nobody knows what this vaccine is and there's all sorts of disinformation, this is interferon. These are Bill Gates implanting chips. This has been a rushed process without trials. Okay, fine. We can all be skeptical. I mean, haven't we, whatever we are now, 18 months into this vaccine, billions of people having gotten this. Yes, they're Jeremy Chardonnys. They're going to be, whatever. People get in car accidents too. It doesn't mean we stop driving. Isn't there enough data out there now that says, however you feel about vaccines, this is not some diabolical plot. This is not something that you're putting poison in your body. How much of this now is just about Djokovic not wanting to, the same way? And again, it's very admirable when Roger Federer has match points on the other side of the net and the fans are all cheering for the other guy and you have certitude and you are unwilling to succumb. It's very admirable. I think it's less admirable in this context. And I wonder how much of this is just, you could flood him with data and you'll always find a social media site that has something to counter that. And you'll always have some conspiracy theorists, but how much of this is just not wanting to concede defeat? Because it seems pretty obvious now that this is not, this is not Bill Gates implanting chips or 5G or what carcinogen, all the nonsense. We've got literally billions of data points now.
Yeah. I mean, basically, I think we are at the stage of him doubling down and that nothing will change his mind, no matter how much evidence is out there. Okay, finally, John, I know you've given up 20 minutes, which has been great. But one final thing. Who's winning the men's US Open this year as a result of perhaps Djokovic's absence?
That is a great question. And I got nothing for you. I mean, you could name any player and you could come up with a reason why not. I mean, it's funny because you have a defending champion who's ranked number one, who I think Medvedev is actually the top pick with the odds makers, but he's won one tournament since last year. I mean, this is not somebody who's riding this great crest of momentum. You have a guy who hasn't lost a match in a major this year in Nadal, but I'm not sure he's played one match since Wimbledon and that was a defeat. I had picked Alcaraz. I mean, I think it's written in a way that this hasn't been the case in 20 years. I think this is a really wide open men's draw. Yeah.
I mean, I've gone, but again, I just plucked it out of nowhere. And
what do you say? What do you say?
I've got Tsitsipas, but I plucked it out, and I was asked the question on a show the other day, and I just plucked it. And now I'm doing a Djokovic. I'm doubling down.
How many outdoor hardcourt titles has Tsitsipas won?
I know, John.
But I can't. I mean, you can dismiss anyone else's pick, but then someone says, "Well, yeah, I know." I mean, it's wide open. Tsitsipas is a good pick. I like that.
It's a bit left field. I know, but
not bad. Oh, not bad.
John, I'll send you a message in a couple of weeks if he's lifting that trophy.
Exactly.
But yeah, it is left field, and as you say, it's the marvelous thing that we have ahead of us. Is this? Will you be going to New York often? Will you be going to Flushing Meadows most or all days?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing some TV commentary for a studio, and then second week I'll be there every day.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to be there from the Tuesday of the second week anyway.
Oh, good day.
So, yeah, in fact, we didn't know each other at all, but I did see you at Wimbledon a couple of times. I was fortunate enough to have a press pass at Wimbledon. Unfortunately, in New York, I'll just have to settle for being a fan's view, but I'm looking forward to it, both the men's and the women's. The women's is, if we think the men's is crazily open, the women's is just insane. Are you going to put your neck on the block for the women's?
I think there's a qualifier who has not won a main draw tour level match. No, we're coming off a year in which the craziest scenario. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I picked Coco, but no, I think the women's is wide open as well. And honestly, I mean, we have 4 players that have won 80 some odd majors with obviously Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, and Serena. I'm okay with a little parity. I mean, I'm okay with I think these next few years are going to be a lot of wide open draws, and I'm okay with that.
Great, John. On that note, we'll call it a day. And thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure we'll speak to you soon.
You got it. See you in New York. Safe travels.
Take care. Bye-bye, John.